Okay, hello year 12. Sorry I can't be there with you in person today, but I thought what I could do instead, which would be super helpful since we finished all the poems, subtle brag, what we should do is actually look at how we would approach a comparative essay. This is this is a completely random question I found on the exam page. I don't know, you won't be able to see it, but I'll read it out for you and I'll put it on the page as well. Read the poem Visitor by Rebecca Watts on page 2 of the source booklet and reread the anthology poem Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass by Simon Armitage. Compare the ways both poets make use of gardens, okay? So, I'm sitting in exam and I see the word gardens and that throws me for a loop. So I've got to think to myself, okay, so it's time to focus and think about how to approach this question. So first of all, before I even read Visitor, I'm looking at the question. The question's asked me to look at gardens and how they make use of gardens. So when I read through this, which I'm going to pause the video and do now, I'm going to make some notes on that, just some basic annotations to get myself started and to kind of start thinking about how both poets approach this differently. So I'll pause the video now and I'll do that and I'll come back in a second. Okay, so before I talk you through the annotations and ideas that I've come up with, I should say I've also been timing myself. I think that was about seven minutes it took to make these notes. Please feel free to pause the video and do your own annotations and then compare and contrast, because you will come up with way different ideas to me probably. But if you would like some kind of guidance and a way in, continue watching and I'm going to talk you through. Then I will pause again and I will do my plan. Okay, so first thing I noticed was the structure. It's a 3-stanza poem. 6 lines per stanza. There's not really a fixed rhyming scheme. It's more of a half rhyme. You have rhymes like roses, moss, brie. Sorry, where did I see that? I did see some half rhyming there. Roses, toes, beans, breathes. There's some attempt, but it's not a fixed rhyming scheme. First things I like to look at when I'm approaching an unseen poem is the first line. I haven't talked about the title yet either. I will get to that. I find myself standing in the garden. I feel like that opening line basically situates the speaker, but it implies that they've almost found themselves there accidentally. So we don't know why they're in the garden yet, but they've found themselves there. So there's a sense of like, how did that happen? How are we here? Among familiars, pink and yellow roses, lovely colors, lovely kind of sensual colors, very the opposite of angry, basically, kind of like passive colours. And the anniversary bird bath now wrapped in moss, stone grey football, wheezes like an old man. So I've just said here that basically all of the objects offer kind of a bridge between the past and present. We see the past and present represented here. In the Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, it's the same. We've got the past, we've got the present, but we also have the future. And sort of like an idea of in Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, this bridge between the past and present is not as pronounced, perhaps, or as developed. So I reach over the back gate, unbolt the gate, sidestep the fat blackcurrant bush. So this listing of movements is very, very similar to Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass. Do you remember in the second, I think it's the second stanza where he talks about how he trailed, plugged, walked again, coupled, saw, clipped them together, dropped the safety catch. Look at the verb choice of Armitage compared to this, the poet here. I reach over the back fence, reach, unbolt, sidestep, weave. All of these kind of movements, they're more careful, they're more measured, and they're more kind of like there's a sense of reverence for the garden and for all the things in the garden. And then we have this kind of almost claustrophobic sense of the heat of the greenhouse. Time breathes slowly, the air heavy as tomatoes. Kind of love that image there as well, like the idea of the air having heaviness. And then that same air hung about your hands. We don't know who the your is. We don't know who this person that they're referring to is. We can imagine it's probably a close family member. But we have this human connection here. And that's definitely, we don't necessarily have the same level of human connection in Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass. Here, all the garden basically seems to represent past and present relationships, and basically how there's this residual connection even after time has passed so long. There's still this residual connection. Whereas in Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, you feel like what's the residual emotion is anger, really, and frustration and power struggles. So third stanza, I make an inventory, cracked flower pots, radio components. So this garden is basically representative, I would say, of the passage of time, the fragility of our own, basically our own existence, but also the fact that we can leave behind a legacy. Like all of these things are bringing back memories to the speaker. There's a little bit of like lost hope in there as well. You know, the radio components never made a full radio. The seeds never grew into geraniums, kind of like thwarted intentions as well. And we do see some thwarted intentions in Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, but it's more leaning towards a destructive need to kind of overcome and basically disempower a plant. So I close the door, the sun stays inside dozing. I think that's really interesting because it says the sun is dozing. Basically, that kind of passive personification really contrasts really nicely with Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, where he says it's seethed. It's seethed, and it was almost like this angry kind of predator, really. So that's an interesting contrast in the way they both use personification in different ways. So then moving on, in the shade of the laburnum, your collection of rain is brimming again. I deliver it. It keeps returning. So this idea of legacy, we've seen kind of this legacy in a positive life, like there's a sense of endurance and regeneration. I delivered. So basically, this is what this person has left behind. This is the legacy they've left behind. In the shade of the laburnum, your collection of rain is brimming again. I deliver it. It keeps returning. That even though the person is no longer there in the garden, what they have put in place still rejuvenates, still creates more life. And basically, I feel like that's basically regeneration in a kind of positive, emotional light, a very lots and lots of nostalgia there. However, in terms of how we would contrast this with Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, these notes I've made are okay, but they're not an essay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause and I'm going to make an essay plan, and I'm also going to time myself so we can see how we're doing here. Okay, I'll pause it, and please do your own annotations and your essay plan too. Thank you. Okay, so I spent roughly about 4 or 5 minutes on this little plan that I've done for myself. I know this is very much like reminiscent of the GCSE way we taught you how to plan for that. However, it is really, there are some parallels. Obviously now you're expected to be more conceptual and looking a lot more deeper at different suggested meanings and interpretations. However, you're still comparing two poems, so I always find something like this quite useful to do. Obviously you plan how you plan. There's no set way to do it. So basically, this is my plan. I start off by thinking, well, what do they have in common? So first of all, they both use listing, and albeit in different ways. The garden is considered a living sentient being. So we do get a sense in both of the poems that the garden actually represents a living organism. And basically it's some sort of, it links to feelings, it links to emotions. And they're basically, the paraphernalia used in the garden is used to kind of communicate those emotions in both poems. Both use personification and both have no fixed rhyming scheme. So getting the similarities out of the way, there you go. Visitor, I feel like visitor actually, even from the title, it implies there's more of a sense of passivity and someone being an observer rather than actively involved. Visitor being, I'm not really belonging here, I'm just here. Okay, so the garden, I felt like the garden, it represents a link between the past and the present, and it keeps a certain amount of legacy alive in doing so. And it holds important symbolic significance in many ways. It links to like material objects that can trigger memories. The speaker is definitely more passive, and it just feels like the approach is much more softly than Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass. The tone is certainly not the same as Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass. This is very much a nostalgic tone, a thoughtful a thoughtful tone connected with human experience. And again, we could relate to Visitor, really. We can relate to Visitor because it's about relationships and loss and grief and survival, okay? And then when I take it over to Chainsaw versus Pampas Grass, um, the garden is actually the scene of an extreme power battle between the Pampas Grass and the chainsaw. So surface level, the chainsaw cannot overcome the Pampas Grass. It does its best to basically cut it down and destroy it, and it's thwarted at every turn, okay? However, the next level, as we remember, is acting as a vehicle for masculine rage against femininity. So we have the kind of the lush, sensual femininity of the Pampas Grass met with the harsh, cutting down powers of the chainsaw. So we can see there that that's a very, the chainsaw takes on a very symbolic, almost phallic significance here. And we also have throughout really uncomfortable visceral imagery. There's sort of like sexual connotations as well, seedy sexual, toxic masculinity connotations that we don't see in Visitor. We feel like this has more of a message than Visitor has, and more of a purpose. And throughout we have this sense of residual anger, and there's a real lack of resolution in the end as the chainsaw seethes in the garage for another winter. So I would now ask you to take a step back. I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to do a plan paragraph by paragraph, and I'll time myself again to let you know how long it takes.